So welcome. We're really excited to have this particular webinar today. Personal reasons for me, because I've known Paula for a long time and I'm really excited to hear what she's been working on since we've last spoken. But this is part of our How Learning what is it? Learning Sciences Inform Learning Analytics webinar series that the Learning Analytics ASCILITE SIG has been doing throughout 2023. So for those of you who haven't joined us on some of our previous webinars, we took the 6 questions that were put forward by the Deans for Learning, which is an American-based group, all about learning sciences. And our aim throughout this year has been to look at those 6 questions and to get people, experts in, to talk about how these sorts of considerations and questions around learning sciences can be applied within the learning analytics context, or better still, how learning analytics can be applied for us to be able to better understand and engage with these particular questions and learning sciences. So I think it's a really timely topic. I think there's a lot of conversation going on at the moment about how students learn and what we need to consider in how that works as to how we design our learning going forward. And I won't mention the dreaded AI at this point, but obviously that's also been a bit of a driver this year in making us reconsider some of these sorts of things. So on behalf of the ASCILITE Learning Analytics SIG organising group. So we've got Hazel with us today. Shreko is unfortunately an apology, and Marion may be lurking somewhere there in the background. And myself, my name's Linda. I always forget to introduce myself, but anyway, we're very, very happy that we have Paula de Barba, Dr. Paula de Barba, along with us today, who I must admit, as I said, I've known Paula for a long time because we used to work together at the University of Melbourne, and Paula worked on one of the very first projects I did post my PhD, which kind of got us kicked off into the area of learning analytics and self-regulated learning and motivation and all of those sorts of things. And because I knew Paula was really good on the motivation side of the story, that was what made us reach out to her to come along today. So Paula has since moved to Monash, and she tells me she's 1 year old in Monash years. And we're very excited to hear about her work, but also her perspectives on motivation and the theories that kind of drive that in answering the question, what motivates students to learn? So I'm not going to say any more, Paula. I'm going to hand over to you, and you can take it away.
Right. Thank you, Linda. I'm very happy to be here talking about this. First of all, do the quick acknowledgement of the country. So I wish to acknowledge that I'm at the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, on whose land I'm presenting from today, and also would like to acknowledge all traditional owners of the land you are attending the session today from, and I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. So what motivates students to learn? So today, with the topic of motivation, we're really considering that motivation dictates a student's direction, intensity, quality, and persistence of their behavior on their learning experience. And for learning analytics, I think it's interesting that an unmotivated student may look like a flat line, or, some sort of like decrease in their interaction with learning resources or peers once they become unmotivated. So for today, I'll be covering the following topics that I think it might be relevant for learning analytics. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the impact of motivation on learning and teaching, the definition of motivation, the main motivational theories, how we can support unmotivated students, and the challenges for learning analytics, both research and application. So the impact of the lack of motivation on learning is related to their ability to plan, monitor, and evaluate their learning, which a lot of us will be familiar with self-regulated learning theory, and that's where I'm drawing from here. So this means that when students are unmotivated, they don't put as much effort into these activities. So that's a big problem there, that there is a disconnect. And students' lack of motivation also impacts teaching. So, for example, when a student puts low effort into an assessment due to the lack of motivation, the assessment then becomes more of a measure of their will rather than their skill. So what that means is that it can impact the validity of the assessment. So that is the assessment purpose to measure what students know. So it becomes more a measure of how motivated they are, and that reflects on the outcome. And additionally, when a student receives feedback, so motivation plays a role on whether and how students will choose to re-engage with an activity and make the necessary adjustments. They'll just ask themselves, okay, do I want to act on this feedback or not? So there is that role of motivation there. So what is motivation? So motivation is what gets students moving towards activities or tasks. And here I'm going to try to use a metaphor for motivation as energy. So bear with me, we'll get there. So if we think about motivation as energy, we can see that it can have many directions, different intensities, the quality of the light can be different, and the persistence of how often it keeps coming through. So which in education impacts students' behavior when learning. And continuing with the metaphor for this talk, we can think of different motivational theories as different switchboards with different constructs as switches, which they believe to control where the energy goes, its quality, intensity, and persistence. And these are the three main motivational theories used in education currently, and I'll provide you with an overview of them. So apologies for going through this for people that already know, but it's briefly going through them. So the first one is self-determination theory. And this theory stipulates that there are three main basic human needs, or if we think about the switches, right, it's in the switchboard that everyone pursues. So we have autonomy, which is the individual sense that they are the origin of their own action, so they are in control. Competence, individuals' perceived effectiveness in successfully navigating their environment, and relatedness, which is the connections and engagements with others. And underlying that, for each of these needs, individuals can be extrinsically and or intrinsically motivated. So extrinsic motivation is related to, pursuing things that for an external reason. So think about rewards. While intrinsic motivation is related to pursuing things based on their internal desire to achieve something. In self-determination theory, extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, they happen in a continuum that ranges from more extrinsic to more intrinsic. And this theory is basically a framework to understand what facilitates or undermines intrinsic motivation. As intrinsic motivation is what we want to facilitate and promote, if we think about it. The other one is situated expectancy value theory. And here, the focus is on the learner's perception of the likelihood of success. So if they think that there is likelihood for them to succeed on something, they'll actually, pursue an action. And they see it as a function of these three different things. So self-efficacy, whether they believe they're capable of doing that, of attaining a task. Value, so how important that task is for them and how much it'll cost them to pursue that task. And that is applied to a specific context, so where they are, where they're from, that really shapes their motivation. And the final one is achievement motivation theory, which is about the approach that people take when they're pursuing something. So it's about achieving something. They have a goal. And that approach, it can be examined through these five contexts. So that approach is sort of shaped by these five constructs here. So goal orientation, which is the type of goal that they're pursuing. For example, if they're focusing on mastering something, so get better at something, or if they want to outperform their peers. Self-efficacy and value beliefs that I just mentioned now, which is being capable of performing and how important that is for them. Interest, which is about how much of that sparks in them emotional and cognitive aspects that finds that as an intrinsic enjoyable experience for them. And contra beliefs is how much they believe that they're in control of that situation. So together, these constructs or switches can give us a clear picture of a student approach to learning and how they will impact their learning behavior. So these are the motivational theories currently most used in education. And going back to the switchboard metaphor, they all have their set of switches or constructs that they think are important to control that student's energy. And when there is a problem with a student's motivation, that is, a switch is turned off or something went wrong, there are decades of research on effective interventions we can use to address them, or that is to fix a switch, for example. So when we put together all these theories, all the different constructs, and these decades and decades of research on interventions in mind, we can start thinking of ways that we can both identify and support unmotivated students. So here are 3 steps, right, that we can use for this, for support, identifying and supporting. So first, we identify the unmotivated students. Then we identify the reason. So is it self-efficacy? Is it value beliefs? And then we introduce a relevant intervention. So going one by one. So thinking about learning analytics, the identifying unmotivated students is about identifying when there is either a flat line or a changing pattern of a student's interaction with learning resources or peers, right? And it's something that's going off. So there are several techniques and approaches, and I'm sure a lot of people in our audience now, they're watching this, will be experts on that. So techniques and approaches to conduct these analysis, particularly relevant here is person-centered temporal analysis. So this type of analysis, they allow for these patterns to be identified, creating a learner model to represent each student. And this way, we can potentially identify patterns, baselines, thresholds for each student to identify when they are unmotivated, for example. But once we have identified an unmotivated student, we can move to step 2. So the step 2 is where we can potentially identify a reason for their lack of motivation or decrease in motivation. So for example, in this example, a student we've noticed that their logs have decreased after they got a series of practice quizzes incorrect in a row. So incorrect, and they didn't log in for 2 days, something like that. So if I think about an achievement goal orientation theory perspective, we may assume that the student's self-efficacy, has been compromised. That is, they now may believe they can't learn something as they keep failing on the practice quiz, so they're struggling there somehow. So that's a hypothesis that we create based on the theories. And the next step, so one potential intervention that we could do is to try to decrease the difficulty of the quizzes and increase it slowly in a scaffolded way, so we can build up the students' confidence so that they are capable to learn about this, for example. So ideally, this would be introduced in a personalized and adaptive way that we could revisit step 2 in case the intervention isn't successful. And this is somehow tricky. As I said, there's a lot of mapping, there is a lot of identifying, a lot of trial and error potentially, and see if it adjusts well or not. But it's doable. It can be doable. It is particularly with the current advances in generative artificial intelligence. There are a lot of things that can be brought to speed with this, right? So following these 3 steps, we could potentially, support unmotivated students. But so is the problem solved there? And for some students, yes. For some students, it might be exactly what they needed. Great, moving on. But for others, not really. And that's where I'll focus a little bit. So for some students, then they might choose not to act upon an intervention, just as I presented early about the impact of motivation on teaching. They will ask themselves, do I want to act on this? Do I really want to, take additional quizzes like that? So continue on the self-efficacy quiz example, they may choose not to complete these additional quizzes or materials that provide. So what is going on here? So why would a student choose not to engage with an intervention or feedback that we provide, and how can we address that? That's something that I've been thinking for a long, long time, and it's been the bulk part of my research. So what I've been doing in my research efforts, they point towards reviewing the second step of identifying the reason of the lack of motivation and zooming out into the student's life to identify a broader reason on why they made the decision to do not uptake an intervention. So if we examine in this example of a student being disengaged after a quiz, we start considering their context. So, okay, they decided, I got it, I failed constantly. What am I going to do? I'm disengaged. And then we just take a step back and we look, in that semester or the teaching period, they are also taking other units of subjects. Okay, that's interesting. And another step back, we see that they're also working on a job part-time maybe and pursuing other passions like sailing or whatever it is. And another step back, they may be struggling with their mental health. We don't know. And juggling everything to spend some time with their friends and family. So what we have here is that the decision to actually uptake a recommendation that comes here at the task level, so at that moment, depends on how this fits within their lives. So, and how these different aspects of their lives are interconnected and continuously influencing and impacting each other. So what I'm talking about here is different levels of granularity. And what I mean by granularity is we can think of different levels as in a micro level, so in a task level, meso level as, when they're in a study session where they might be juggling different units and doing different things in a, certain period of time. And we can keep zooming out and out to the macro level where, for example, we're considering aspects of, are they working? How the leisure? How are they, their relationship with themselves and others? And understanding how these different levels are connected to each other and how they impact each other is one of the biggest challenges in motivational theory. In education, understanding this interconnection is crucial to determine what type of support that we need to provide to students. So should it be at the micro task level, such as a prompt, or a broader macro type of support, such as time management skills to juggle everything, or even counseling? And these could all be the reason behind of a student's decrease motivation or our understanding of that flat line or decrease of interaction with an LMS, for example. We cannot assume that it's just at the micro level. It could be something else. So here, these levels of granularity, they pose two main challenges for learning analytics. So first, I think it's about the interdependence between levels. So how can we capture and model these dynamic connections? Well, there is an interesting stream of research that I've seen coming up that's based on complex or dynamic systems. And it explores how nested models, nested interconnected levels interact with each other. So for example, here on this paper, Shame and colleagues, they proposed a dynamic computational model of motivation based on neural networks modeling, modeling the interaction between multiple levels of motivation. So what happens is, if something changes in one level, how does it impact at the micro level. So if something happens in their life, more macro, they lose a job. How can we see that in the task level, for example, and vice versa? And another one, the second challenge, is related to capturing and processing multimodal and distributed data across multiple levels and contexts. So you think about, to some extent, we're getting much better at the micro and the meso point. So think about tasks and sessions. We can, capture quite a lot of information, learning analytics there. But as we move towards the macro, it starts to get quite patchy. And we start to touch things such as issues such as ownership of data. And who owns that data? And it's mostly owned by the students, right? And it's going to be in different platforms. It's going to be distributed. It's going to be, but they are at the center of all these pictures. That's where they are. And, they're the ones that hold them all together. So my view to deal with this challenge would be that we need to put the student behind the steering wheel of their learning experience, inviting them into this process. So really bringing their data with them for their own benefit without judgment, So it's something that they decide to bring. They decide to feed into a model that will benefit their learning experience. So an example of this are open learner models, where the models that we may use in intelligent or smart learning systems to represent a learner is open to them and to their input. So really an interactive experience for them. Oh, good. I'm good on time. So in sum, what I presented today here was about that student motivation impacts learning and teaching, so not just learning, that there are many theories with multiple constructs with non-effective interventions to support unmotivated students. However, motivation is complex with multiple interconnected levels of granularity. And I presented here the macro, meso, and micro, resulting in multimodal distributed data that we need to deal with. And learning analytics can help address these challenges in motivational research by working on integrating these levels of granularity. I just saw a typo here. These levels of granularity, and putting the student behind the steering wheel by inviting them into this process. So I have a page with references for whoever's interested for later. And that was my presentation. Thank you very much. And I am happy that I kept it under 30 minutes so we can have a lot of time for discussion if, people have questions or further comment on something.
To kick us off, I did have one question I was thinking about as you were talking there, because obviously you're saying that that learning analytics can help us to identify some of these different levels and students that are having some motivational problems. Getting to the heart of the problems, as you say, is complex, but not impossible, but is difficult. But before we even get to the point where we give educators the data and those insights from those systems, what do you think our educators need in terms of knowledge to be able to deal with these concepts of motivation? How do we bring them up to speed on what you've just shown us, I guess?
Well, I think there are a few ways to tackle this. In a sense that one is through learning design. So if a learning design of a unit is purposefully, trying to think of motivation from the start, and things like how to spark motivation, how to maintain motivation, how to work with ebb and flows of motivation. I think that's one part of the lift. So if a student is keen to be there, that's great. They can have a great experience and not be struggling to deal with a very boring
Yeah.
content page with a very, which when I started my research quite a few years ago, that was the thing about, like, how do we make this not so boring, right? It was just like page after page after page of clicking next. So I think that's one part. The other part is the scholarship of teaching and learning, is really wanting to get better on what they do. And I think that's, just to understand how learners' motivation work, and also be okay if a student decides not to fully participate. Because I think that's when we're thinking about this macro and the micro, we could design a beautiful unit. We can understand the best, not the best, but we can understand a lot about, the scholarship of teaching and learning and apply things. But if this is, a breadth unit or a breadth subject that the student, it's on their lowest priority, they have multiple things going on in their lives, that's okay for them to do the bare minimum to pass and gain the knowledge to achieve the learning outcomes and move on.
Yeah. Fantastic. I guess, that's the challenge I have in the kind of role that I sit in, is how to motivate teachers to learn about motivation. But yes, that's another conversation for another time. Bruce has got to go off to another meeting, but that's okay. Thought it was very thought-provoking, so that's great feedback. But Michaela has a question saying, could you please elaborate or give an example of what is meant by putting the students behind the wheel?
Right. Thank you for that question. I love that. So what I mean putting them behind the wheel is, we're only going to get the full picture. So that's a full picture of that person's life, for example, if the student comes in. And so there's got to be some input from the student that's going to say, you know what, I just lost my job. I'm struggling. I need my help is not a prompt. Right. So for them to have that kind of freedom to bring that to a model that allows to model that into their learning experience, I think that's something that would be very important, to bring them to the steering wheel, and in a non-judgmental way. As I was saying, if they want to somehow in that model say, hey, this unit or this subject is my lowest priority, do not nudge me about it. No judgment. That's okay. So it's something that's more like a learner model that is on service, serving the student more than anyone else, serving their learning journey. So that's what I mean, putting them behind the steering wheel of data from the university, but also their data from, do I want to connect other things that might, my mood every day? Sure, I'll just put it on if that's going to help me with my prompts. That's great.
Absolutely. I can see a little bit of a tension there with some educators who are measured on their students' performance outputs. So, if the student says, I'm happy with a pass, but the university says, I don't want teachers who only pass students or just pass students, that's potentially problematic as well. We've got, could you share what LA application software you're using, and is it connected to your LMS? Is the next question there.
Well, I'm currently at Monash Online. And so I just follow whatever is available at Monash University. They use Moodle. They do have some of the learning analytics activated on that. I'm particularly interested on investigating the use of network analysis. So ethnographic network analysis I've been looking at, and I find it amazing how you can visualize just the connection between different things. And I think that's if you think about the different levels, that could be one way to see that. I think that's the one that I've been putting more effort lately to better understand and start to think about, okay, what uses could be here that you can model different levels and bring different things together.
There's lots of questions coming through now. Lene's got a question. If anyone wants to chuck their mic on and ask the question themselves, they may. Lene, do you want to ask this, or are you happy for me to read it out?
I'm happy to ask. Hello.
Yeah, please do.
So much.
Yeah.
Hi.
I really enjoyed your presentation, and I was just wondering whether you've explored, or if you have any views on it, if you haven't explored it, on how or if demographic variables affect motivation. For example, gender or socioeconomic status, first in family, age, any of that. I'm just curious. Thanks.
Yes. I haven't personally investigated that, but I know a little bit about it. And the second theory that I've mentioned there, the situated expectancy value theory. So it's about what they expect. It used to be called expectancy value theory, and they've changed it to situated, just to include, to make more explicit about that kind of the differences in context that the student brings with them. I think what I like to think about, not so much about motivation. What I've seen is when motivation is activated, for example, the level of planning, monitoring, and evaluation. So we're a bit more now in the self-regulated learning, right? So the activation of those, and once it's activated, some groups may not have as many learning strategies as well developed as other students, for example, when you think of that. But on the motivation itself, I think that's an important question about, I'm thinking now about self-efficacy for sure, right? Self-efficacy, what's value beliefs, so what's important for them, what's when you think about the cost of doing something, there are different things that are going to enter their scale, right? And I'm thinking about some initiatives here at Monash, they're calling the Rich Experience initiatives, where they actually pay for low SES students to have international experiences. So it's not really just, so that is about, okay, it's not just the value, and I'm thinking not the cost as just the monetary cost, but, if they go into this, they're going to have to not work for all, it's all the kind of things that go in the balance. Oh, should I uptake this or not? So I think that's very interesting to be investigating.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Fantastic. We've got a question from Wen around personal learning journeys. So Wen, are you there? Do you want to chuck your mic on and ask your question?
Basically, I was just thinking, if students keep a journal about their learning journal each week, so teacher could see how they are getting on, or if they have difficulty, and then basically just gives them some maybe marks for contributing in each week. I was just wondering, could that be help for identifying these unmotivated students?
Yes. So that's there is some quite interesting line of research there with the study diaries, and my colleague Jacqueline Broadbent has conducted quite a few extensive research at Deakin, Linda, of students using that. So I think that's a very useful way to help them track. And I think anything that brings them to the awareness of that, that's you can think about it, it's not metacognition. So some people say it's meta motivation, that you start thinking about and observing your motivation, how it's flowing. So one thing is about a student being strategic about how much they're going to engage with something, and they being aware of that. And another way, another situation is a student that suddenly starts to feel really unmotivated. And for those, a study diary would be really good to bring out some clues on what's going on there. Because as we said, to go from step 2, which is finding out the reason to provide an intervention, it's hypothesis. You're just testing different things. Is it self-efficacy? Is it, is it value beliefs? Is it, maybe they're just not as interested in this topic? What's going on there?
I noticed Marion's put her hand up. Have you got something to say about this particular topic, Marion? Yeah, go ahead.
I do,
Marion, of
yeah.
course, is our other
I
our
do.
other
I
leader.
actually, before you move on to another question, and we are looping back to this particular issue, I think the study diaries is a great idea, and weekly reflections, or how many times a week you do it, is a great idea. However, in large classes, it's a big workload for staff. And I just wondered, how do you actually deal with the data? Have you maybe used AI in order to analyze the data so that you have some idea where students are struggling with? I mean, we have some really big courses and reflections are done in big courses, but in order to have some actionable insight and in a timely manner, we need to read a lot of reflections. So I just wondered, what are you doing to actually collect that data?
Right. I'm particularly not working with that. I have done some work with natural language processing. I think it's fantastic. I think there is no reason why not to, up to a certain extent.
The money and technical expertise, but yes.
Yes, exactly. So I was going to say, ideally, that would be, if you think about a learner model, I think it would be amazing if each student, and here at Monash, there are over 85,000 students, if each student had their own learner model that, we can interact using generative AI to, identify things, and you can use there are a lot, especially from educational psychology, so many scales that a student can just choose to complete, and then it can give some sort of like indication of what it could be. So it doesn't need to be just a reflection like that. It can be a reflection of, complete this, sort of like a prompt. Very expensive, but I think it would have been amazing if someone had, follow through with a project where they create this kind of learner model that goes and follows with the student from, day one at university and beyond. So not even just that university, but postgrad studies. And if I'm doing a master's, and after a while it has learned my patterns of motivation, it notices that I'm actually dipping my interaction, that there is a dip in my interaction with something, then it might say, oh, hey, remember you did this back there when, in your undergraduate years, bring it back. That'll be, I think for me, it'll be the most amazing thing to have.
So wouldn't it be wonderful if you could have some sort of support like that to help them in their transition from high school into university? That changing from how a high school teaching and learning model sort of works into more of the autonomy that they get in higher education. Oh, lots of possibilities. Fantastic. All right, we'll go back to the questions now. But thanks for indulging us there, Paula. So we've got one, Jackie. So you're asking about research on co-creation of content and resources and how that might contribute to motivating and engaging students. That's a great question. Paula, have you got any ideas on co-creation?
Yes, I think it's great. I think my take here for the co-creation would be the co-creation of this learner model. I think co-creating units, co-creating contents is also, if you think about the self-determination theory, it's really tapping into the autonomy, giving them, empowering them, and the relatedness. So you create connections with that for the students. My idea of the co-creation would be, here's the learner model, here's my learner model. I'm the owner, so it's more of like a co-creation, but 60% more on their side than on the university. I would say, a little bit of a distribution like that.
Absolutely. Mimi's got a question here. Mimi, if you want to jump in at all, just having a look here. So motivate pathway students who do not have time conflicts but barely logs into the LMS. Oh, interesting. Okay, so how do you motivate those students who have the time but are not engaging?
Well, zoom out. And I think that's the type of have a conversation. What's going on? Are they studying in a different way? Because we've seen there is some research that they're going to study groups and we don't see the logs, we don't know what's going on. So reach out and try to zoom out and see what else is going on in their lives. And if they say, oh, okay, I just want to pass on this, and then you can provide some sort of guidance if they're open to it, if they want, how they can pass while learning the most crucial things to achieve the learning outcomes. That would be my advice.
Absolutely. I'm going to skip over a couple of questions here because I just want to come to Claire's comment that she's got here in the chat about finding it demotivating myself to have a class of students who announce that this unit is a low priority. Yes. I think that's a really interesting comment, especially in relation to some of the universities in the Melbourne area that have certain models where they have to do breadth subjects. But Paula, have you got anything you'd like to add to Claire's comment there?
I agree. I find it's demotivating myself, and it's hard to deal. But think about your own work, Claire. Like you have a lot of priorities, and some reports that you need to write, some units that you need, they're not going to be your top priority. You're still going to do a okay job. They still, you're still going to get to the bar. But I think it's an understanding that it's the student's learning journey. We are there to make sure that they at least get whatever they need, let's say, to achieve the passing of the learning outcomes so they can continue with their journey. And I agree, it can be it's very humbling. It's very humbling.
Absolutely. Do you think that teachers spending a bit more time thinking about their own motivation might help them to be a bit more empathic towards students and their motivation perhaps as well, thinking about that sort of thing? I'm going to jump around a little bit, but Colin, do you want to talk about your abilities of tutors, for example?
We talk a lot about the actions that educators can take and the interventions that they're delivering, but it takes a village, yada yada. And I just wonder what other approaches we might consider for a more sort of holistic strategy to because obviously, and the challenge is always going to be that the tutors have less pedagogical knowledge or training or support to be good educators and provide this support, but they're generally the people who have more one-to-one interaction with the students, so they are more likely, ideally, to know whether someone's lost their job or whatever else is going on. I don't have an answer.
Let's hope Paula does. Paula?
I don't either. Colin, come on. Well, I would say that, of course, it would be amazing to develop tutors' abilities to respond to motivational issues. That would be great. And the same with self-regulated learning issues and digital literacy issues. But as you're saying, like, it starts building up onto different things. I think, well, there is scope there to maybe, when you think about the different levels, so the micro at the task level and the macro, or the what's going on with their lives, the universities usually have a range of supports. So I think how the interconnection of those different levels in motivational research or learning analytics is a challenge. Perhaps in universities, the flow with them could be something to be worked on. Tutors would be a great investment, right? Or if you have an open learner model, or however they interact, just to have ways to capture that'll be very, very important. And I cannot not mention I think mental health issues and that just being trained to be attuned, or being a mental health first aid, or just to be attuned and to be looking into things that are sometimes beyond that learning and teaching the content. I think that would be magnificent, but wish list.
There's lots of things happening in the chat right now too, and suggestions. I know Hazel's just recommended that all tutors do the grad cert, which would be wonderful. Potentially a little bit problematic from a logistics perspective, but yeah, I think that there is definitely, I mean, one of the things that Deakin has just done is put a Pro Vice Chancellor sessional staff in to say, how do we support sessionals better? How do we induct sessionals into these sorts of contexts a little bit better? So hopefully, certainly that will be an interesting experiment to see what we can do, because I totally agree with you, Colin. They're often the front line of the support for students, and having them understand motivation and self-regulation and all that kind of stuff would be great, but it's something else on top of all of their discipline knowledge and processes of the university and all the rest of those things. But yeah, it would be, maybe we should just employ people more full-time and have less sessionals, but that's just my point of view. I'm going to go back to Hazel's questions, and I'm going to ask the second one first, which was, do you find that there is a difference in importance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? Because that's quite an interesting big question.
That is interesting. I think it depends where the theoretical framework that you're coming from. If you think about the self-determination theory, they try to promote the intrinsic motivation as being, the best, I would say. That's my view. But there is sort of like a continuum. So it's hard for something to be totally, intrinsic or totally extrinsic. It's always sort of like a combination that, if you think about one diminishing from one side and one diminishing from another side. If you go to achievement goal theory, you can think about goal orientation. I think would be something that would be similar to intrinsic motivation. So if someone has a mastery goal orientation, they are looking for to improve themselves, how I'm doing now, how I'm doing tomorrow. I just want to be better on that. And performance, it would be, I want to be better than others. At the beginning of the research decades ago, they thought that, mastery is, it's the best. Let's try to design all the classrooms so everyone has mastery goal orientation, and that's how it's going to be. And then over the years, that's the research showed that actually multiple goal orientations are the most effective for learning. So where you have a mixture of mastery and performance, and that's where you find the better learning outcomes. My 2 cents on that would be, okay, what about other, like if you zoom out, what about other orientations or other goals? So we're thinking here just about the learning goal, but what if you think about the other goals in their lives, like, exercise, having friends and all of that. So it's a lot of juggling around, but it seems that mixing it up seems to be the most effective for learning.
I noticed there's a university in another state, I won't necessarily say which one, who has just released a new marketing campaign that really says, come to our university because, you can sort of fit us around the rest of your life, which we recognise is really important to you. And whilst I'm all for work-life balance and, obviously well-being and all of that sort of stuff, I think sometimes some of those messages kind of come down to the students as, as long as you pay your fees, you'll get through, and that students don't necessarily recognize that they've got to put the effort in. They've got to pay, they can't learn something that they don't attend to, for example. And so the motivation question comes into that equation, I guess, too, in terms of, your university is basically saying you can do all of these different things and it's all going to be fine. But perhaps the students might lose a little bit of that part of the message that says, but you've still got to do the work.
Yeah, so I think it's the, if you think about the expectancy value, the situated expectancy value, so what's the probability of them achieving? It's just putting it very high, right? So sort of like, you will achieve this. Oh yeah, the cost, we'll talk about the cost later, but yeah, we'll help you get there. But you're completely right. There needs to be a discussion of what's the cost, the value of this.
Yeah, absolutely. John, are you still on the call? John's got a great, oh yes, John, I can see you. You've got your camera on even. Do you want to just quickly take us through your comment in the chat there? Because I think that's quite interesting.
Sure. Thank you. And hello, Paula. And that was great. This is my first time to one of these. So thank you to my ACU colleagues that invited me along. It was really cool. I have to make a confession. SDT is one of my absolute loves and passions. So my PhD was on it, albeit in sport and exercise. And then I've carried it over into a learning and teaching role at ACU. So we're also lucky at ACU because we have John Marshall-Reeve, who is probably the most published researcher in SDT and education. So I remember picking his brain about this, and he was actually doing a workshop on, how we do motivation in the classroom, or how we attend to motivation in the classroom. He really kind of reoriented me around SDT and just said, look, focus on importance and interest. And actually don't even focus on interest. You can't change students' interest. That's not our game. Our game is to really focus on importance and highlighting the value proposition of education, right? And you can do that in an extrinsic way. You could really promote the assessment, for example, or how much money you could earn if you're a physio and you graduate. Or you could focus on the more intrinsic or self-determined reasons about why you would do this piece of work, right? And how it might help you to solve world problems and, cure the sick and, things like that. So what I thought he triggered with me, which was quite interesting, getting to my question, Paula, was this idea that, a lot of learning analytics seems to look at trying to quantify the outcome of motivation. So, if they logged into the LMS, that's the behavioral outcome of a motivation. Whereas what we could probably do better is try to get ahead of that and actually ask students what are their interests, knowing that we can't change that, but maybe that we could point them towards things in our curriculum that might tap into that, knowing that there'll be varied ones. And also thinking about importance. So a lot of people talked about, they don't like the subject. They don't like the foundational subjects in, physio or other degrees. So how do we orient them towards the interest? Or how do we kind of really supercharge the importance of this learning? You're learning about bones and muscles. You're never going to need to really know this knowledge, but you need it for later on. So how do we tap into that? So the question here is, what's your view on trying to put learning analytics at the front end of motivation as opposed to the back end as a behavior outcome? And I guess asking students, so what are you interested in today? What's your importance value in this week? And what are you trying to get out of coming to class or, doing the online learning or whatever it is? Sorry, that was a really waffly question.
No, that's amazing. Thanks so much, John. I think it'll be ideal. So in one of my research that I'm conducting with Eduardo Oliveira at University of Melbourne, it is about that. We ask we prompt them at the beginning of the semester, and then we go through reflection, sort of in a way to try to steer that. I don't want to be preaching about learner models, but that's what seems that I've been doing today. But if we had a learner model, and you could add those things, and you could, and that's the idea, that it can actually tailor things for you and provide that kind of additional things. So that motivation, the lack of motivation doesn't become a problem. That would be ideal. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about interest. That's so my PhD, all my thesis was in interest. I think it's a great measure of to tap into the motivation. If you get a student say, are you interested on this? Just try to get any kind of measure you can easily see, sort of like get a health check of how their motivation is, and then you can dig deeper. But definitely, if you can get the interest first and the importance first, that'll be the ideal.
I would love to continue, especially this bit of the conversation, but all the other questions that we have in the chat as well. But we are at time, so I'm going to have to draw our discussion to a close. But I think you would all agree that was a really interesting, not only presentation, but discussion afterwards. You can tell from the number of questions we've had and the contribution across the board. It's been fantastic. So thank you very much. Thank you, Paula, so much for your time and your expertise in this area. We're really excited to continue this conversation. We've got one more webinar before the end of the year that finishes off the Deans for Impact questions. And I think they've really shown that asking these questions and thinking about how teachers, but also how students understand these kinds of questions can have such an impact on learning and teaching, obviously. So that's really important. One quick spruik for our workshop at the ASCILITE conference. So if anyone's going to be in Christchurch in December, the SIG is going to be running an hour-long workshop that's going to consolidate all the different conversations and workshops and things that we've done in this series. So if you happen to be at ASCILITE, please do join us for that session.